Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to NCAT webinar series, West Coast Hemp Production. Today is the fourth and final webinar in our series of the four-part series. And today we're going to be covering regulation, compliance, and insurance. My name is Mike Lewis, and I'm a sustainable agriculture specialist out of NCAT's Northeast office in New Hampshire. Also today, I'm joined by Catherine Favor, Sustainable Agriculture Specialist with NCAT as well. Most of you are likely familiar with NCAT by now, but for those that aren't, I do want to take just a second to tell you who we are. The National Center for Appropriate Technology, also known as NCAT, is a national nonprofit that has been helping people build resilient communities through local and sustainable solutions that reduce poverty, strengthen resilience, and protect natural resources since 1976. We work to provide agriculture education on a wide variety of topics. In this webinar series, we are focused on hemp production. It's the risks involved with there, the current lack of rewards, production, cultivation, harvesting, processing, and marketing. Today, we'll be focusing more on hemp's regulatory climate and covering some crop insurance options. In specific, we'll be discussing the local regulatory climate on the West Coast, federal regulation and standardization, the seed selection and sourcing for maintaining compliance, helping to maintain compliance with your crop, and hemp crop insurance options. Today, we're fortunate to have 7 of the country's top hemp experts with us, who I'll introduce a little bit later in more detail, but really quickly, we have Courtney Moran, who's the founding principal of Earth Law LLC, Patrick Goggin, owner of the law offices of Patrick D. Goggin, Jody McGinness, the executive director of the Hemp Industries Association, and Blake Butler, executive director of the Southeast Hemp Association. Zev Paiss is a hemp expert at RhizoVerified and the chair of the Hemp Industries Association Fiber Council, and Jeff Schahczenski, an NCAT Sustainable Agriculture Specialist and Agricultural Natural Resources Economist. I do want to go over really quick our agenda, but some quick housekeeping before we begin. Please remember to stay on mute, but feel free to leave your camera on. This webinar will be recorded, and we'll send out the recording along with recordings of all of the other 3 webinars to register after this is completed. This is a pretty long webinar. It's about 2.5 hours. We don't have any scheduled breaks, so please feel free to take breaks on your own as needed. And as I said, if you're worried about missing anything, these will be recorded and released out through our media channels after the event. Just really quickly want to cover our run of show today. We're going to start off our webinar talking with Courtney Moran and Patrick Goggin about California and Oregon's current regulatory climate and how to obtain licenses. Then we'll dive into a discussion with Jody McGinness and Blake Butler, who will discuss regulation at a federal level, including what the current regulations and requirements are, and along with projected future of potential regulations and quality standards that we see coming in the pipeline. Then we'll move on to Zev, where he'll discuss with us seed selection for meeting quality standards, make sure that you're maintaining compliance. And lastly, Jeff will be talking about crop insurance options for hemp farmers. After all of these presentations, we will have a few minutes for question and answers. So be sure to write your questions in the chat as the discussion is going on. I do, so I don't forget them. But and then my colleague Catherine will help us get those out to the panelists after during the Q&A. I do want to bring out that in the chat, Catherine will have posted a link to a brief survey. It's really important if you could help us out and take this. This is a way for us to learn what topics and information that you all would like to learn about in the future. And this is the last of this year's hemp webinar series, but we will be doing more workshops in the future. So it's really helpful in helping us to understand what information you all out there feel like you need and want to hear about. I do want to acknowledge our sponsors for this event. All of this series was made possible by the generous support of the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center. So we do want to acknowledge them. And then I also want to point out that beyond just this webinar, we hope that you continue to call on NCAT for your sustainable agriculture questions. NCAT manages the ATTRA project, which is our sustainable agriculture program. We have a hotline that you can call at any time to get one-on-one direct technical assistance and to get help with any sustainable agriculture related questions that you might have. So again, if you have any remaining questions after this webinar that we haven't covered for you, we hope that you'll reach out to us through the myriad of different ways that you can do so. So moving into our first panel discussion on legislation in California and Oregon, our first speakers today are Courtney and Patrick, and they'll be talking about existing California and Oregon regulation, including what is allowed, what is not allowed, and how to obtain licenses, and what other important rules to watch out for. This panel is going to be moderated by Jody McGinness. So real quickly, we do some introductions. Courtney Moran is the founding principal of Earth Law LLC. She is a leading expert on hemp law, championing legal policy for a sustainable cannabis hemp industry. She litigated the landmark case KAB LLC versus USPIS, which established precedent for the shipping of hemp through the US Postal Service. She played a key role in drafting and negotiating the language included in the 2018 Farm Bill, which federally legalized hemp. Courtney is a sought-after speaker, attorney, and lobbyist. Patrick Goggin is a 26-year practicing solo-based attorney in San Francisco, California, and he serves as the chief counsel for the California Hemp Council. He has waged battle on the legal front lines of industrial hemp and general cannabis reform for over 2 decades. Mr. Goggin served as the co-counsel in the seminal HIA versus DEA 2000 case that solidified hemp food's legality. Later, Mr. Goggin led the industry effort with Senator Mark Leno in 2013 to finally pass California's Industrial Hemp Farming Act after 3 vetoes. Jody McGinness is the executive director of the Hemp Industries Association, and he'll be moderating this, helping to facilitate the discussion. Jody started actually as the 5th executive director in the Hemp Industries Association. It's 28-year history at the height of the pandemic in 2020, and he has spent the intervening months focused on adapting the HIA to survive and positioning it to thrive in support of a new national hemp industry. Jody's background includes most recently the Director of Advancement for the Marijuana Policy Project, where he had the opportunity to be in part of an advocacy program and a policy team as that organization led successful campaigns in Michigan, Illinois, and Vermont. Jody has spent his career serving nonprofit associations and membership organizations, and what excites and inspires him about the HIA is the opportunity to be part of a purpose-driven organization at a time of such momentous potential to the industry it serves. And I will stop sharing my screen and pass it off to Jody. Or should I leave this on, Catherine? We want to see their faces.
Yeah, you can stop sharing your screen. This is great.
Okay, perfect. There you are, Jody, Courtney, and Patrick. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for that thorough introduction, Mike. It's very kind things you said about me and very accurate things you said about Courtney. And so what I wanted to start off with is just to say my job here is to facilitate the discussion among experts, because you have here 2 legal minds, and Patrick and Courtney, who are definitely the people to know from the perspective of the regulatory reality on the ground for California in Patrick's case and Oregon respectively for Courtney. So I will do my best not to impede their discussion and let them share their knowledge with you unfettered. And thank you both for participating today. Courtney, you want to start off?
Sure, yeah. So thank you so much for all the introductions, everyone. Today, we're going to focus on some Oregon regulation, and the role that I play in Oregon is I'm actually also the president and lobbyist for the Oregon Industrial Hemp Farmers Association. And we actually formed back in 2015 in response to some of the issues that we were having with first developing our program and some regulatory hurdles we were facing between the marijuana and the hemp industry, and just really trying to get the program off the ground. To date, we've actually passed 5 bills setting up, the cornerstones of the Oregon hemp program. We work with all of the agencies within the state. We work with law enforcement. We work with our marijuana organizations, and we really try to build a robust foundation for policy, because we know that with Oregon being not only a leading hemp state, but medical and having both medical and retail, adult use retail legalization within our state, that a lot of other states are looking to the work that we do here and the policy that we set, and that it also has broader implications, not only for other states, but federally. So we've been, very, very cautious and conscious of the way that we've been developing policy. But of course, as we've all seen every year, there's new products that come to market, there are new issues that come to light, and that results in new policy development. So Jody, do you want to ask questions, or do you want me to just kind of jump into what we're working on in Oregon?
I was hoping that you would go ahead and start off by sort of giving the overview of what is allowed and what is not from a product standpoint, as I understood the plan.
Okay. So Oregon's, as we sit here today, I would say is a pretty open market. We do have testing requirements for end products that are entering our market, whether they're produced or manufactured within Oregon, or if they're produced or manufactured anywhere in the world. They have to meet our same testing requirements. We do have a 0.3 total THC limit on end products going to consumers outside of our retail dispensaries. We have options for folks to engage with our retail dispensaries and to sell products with higher THC concentrations, such as smokable products up to 1%, concentrates up to 5%, things like that. However, we are currently in several rulemakings, which I'll get into some more detail about, and that is potentially going to start creating different rules, requirements, and restrictions for what products can be sold, and not necessarily like types of products like we're seeing in other states where there are smokable hemp bans or beverage or food bans or supplement bans or things like that, but more in the line of what type of cannabinoids are allowed and what THC limits are actually going to be allowed in those products.
Shall I chime in a little bit on California? California has been, regulatorily, and the development of hemp policy has been, slower coming. And as was mentioned in my bio, it took us 8 years to get legislation passed in California. Starting in 2005, we finally got it passed in 2013. And we had to jump through numerous hurdles dealing with law enforcement agencies and those concerns. And the sausage making process that we ended up with there, as is wont to do in most legislation in California, left it such that we needed to do years of cleanup and continuing to refine that legislation. But today we do have finally a robust program here that has some limitations, but also some significant allowances due to recent legislation that was passed, AB 45, and signed by the governor in October. As many of you may know, we were barred, or roadblocks were placed in front of us by our Department of Public Health for allowing hemp extract CBD rich products. our Department of Public Health is really an extension of the FDA. And so they were parroting the position of the FDA that CBD is an adulterant and a prohibited dietary supplement and food item. That said, we finally passed legislation, so these products are allowed. It has urgency status, and now, therefore, a lane has been paved to allow for and to create for the regulation of hemp manufacturing by our Department of Public Health. It's a 90-day ramp to get compliant and to get registered, but that opens up all retail shelves, except for cannabis retail. We do not yet allow that, but as part of AB 45, it created a mandate for the Department of Public Health to issue a report on how we could be integrating hemp into cannabis manufacturing, and to allow hemp products being sold in cannabis retail. But beyond that, and then actually there's another temporary issue on inhalable products, which there was a major a push by the administration here to prohibit smokable hemp products. That got narrowed down to inhalable products, which interestingly is not defined under the law. So whether or not that includes flower, I think is debatable. But at the moment, things like vape cartridges and pre-rolls, they are seen as prohibited until the legislature passes taxing legislation that, interestingly, in this state, we've been dealing with a lot of challenges on the cannabis side, and high tax rates, not making enough of, leading to not making enough of a dent into the black market. So by some increased taxes in the state on inhalable products, we're seeing it as that it will potentially lead to the decline and assist in the decline, lowering the cannabis taxes. And to Courtney's point, similar to what they're doing in Oregon, is we've worked. Like there have been some lines drawn between the hemp and the cannabis advocates and the retailers and the manufacturers, because frankly, cannabis felt heavily threatened. They felt that there was some sort of unfair competition that was being created. And that was a reason that it took us years to get this hemp manufacturing legislation passed. But in so doing, we have created a system where the products will be tested like they're tested for cannabis, such that we're creating a lot of consumer protection out there. But farmers are going to need to pay attention to the tests that are being taken and required on the product side, because that's not actually required at the testing on the production side. It's really just testing for the amount of THC. And the other issue that we're also been working a lot on is, the rise of these other tetrahydrocannabinols, Delta 8, Delta 10, that are seemingly intoxicating. And what we're doing is working to encapsulate those, or at least the approach we've taken in California is totaling those all up so that they have to be less than 0.3%. And if it rises above it, it's going to go into the cannabis space. And when I say cannabis in California, that really means marijuana.
Yeah. So a fairly complicated picture, all told, and quite a lot of shifting sands there. And I think that ties in nicely to what Courtney was saying. Starting back in 2015, Courtney, you've been advocating for farmers, and they've seen a constantly changing regulatory environment. So could you maybe speak from your perspectives as to how producers can really protect themselves and enter this market in a way that accounts for future changes? I mean, there are elements of AB 45 that would be impacted by what if the FDA issued certain regulations, and so even this bill that was 8 years in the making and then accomplishes so many great things includes quite a lot of TBD considerations. And so how can farmers account for those sort of that long-term playing field on a shifting sand?
I think honestly, it's a very tough landscape for them to navigate, unfortunately. It's not like another crop where, it's very consistent. We aren't dealing with controlled substances issues. We aren't dealing with law enforcement issues and things like that. And I think every industry has a lot of research and development and technology advancement, but I don't think in the way that we're seeing with hemp or with cannabis and these different cannabinoids that are, arguably artificially derived or synthesized and what have you. And so, I mean, from the farmer perspective, I think it's really about knowing your genetics, following the legislation, following the rulemakings, engaging with farming associations or industry organizations that are working on policy, and staying in very good communication with the Department of Agriculture. And so I know that my members, we work on the legislation, we work on the policy. So everyone in OIHFA, they're aware of things as it's happening before it even happens, before the legislation passes, before it becomes a final rule. If you're not involved and you're kind of, just on the outskirts, it's going to be very hard to catch up because you're not going to have that lead-in time to follow, as the policy is developing. I'm hopeful that now that we have 2018 Farm Bill, we have USDA final rules that have been in place since March. Most states are going to be transitioning by January to these, USDA final rules, or of course, some states are going right into, USDA regulation that will start having some more uniformity, at least from on the farm perspective. I think the manufacturers, that's going to be a much longer game and a lot more policy development to continue. But from the farm perspective, because we do finally have some very solid federal regulations, that should hopefully become more uniform, at least up to the moment of harvest.
Right, and there you're speaking of the USDA's final rule.
Exactly.
Right. So that took effect. Just for context for those listening, and because some of this can get kind of arcane when you're speaking about federal versus state. The general framework is a joint responsibility framework between the USDA at the federal level and states or tribal nations. States or tribal nations have the ability to simply go by the USDA's hemp program and hemp plan, or come up with their own and submit it for approval. In some cases, we've seen states like Wisconsin and I believe North Carolina that started out with their own hemp programs and are now, after a year or two of that, switching to the USDA's plan, either for various reasons we can get into, but a lot of it has to do with the struggles that are inherent with the hemp industry and with hemp as the reintroduction of a new crop. I mean, the unique challenges that dynamic of having that dual responsibility creates include how those two play off against each other. So in the case of California, some things take effect or begin to follow the FDA's guidelines if the FDA issues federal regulations on them. California has sort of once again taken the lead in getting ahead of the federal government. The FDA has not provided the regulatory guidance that the Farm Bill seemed to have anticipated yet, and there's been a real gap there for things like ingestible CBD, food and beverages. And California now has a robust regulatory framework for these things getting put into place and finalized through this legislation, but that's not a model that every state's going to be able to follow, and that's one major market, the 5th largest economy in the world, but it's an open question as to what is going to happen legislatively to change the dynamic at the federal level right now. So I don't want to speak. I think I wanted to give Patrick an opportunity to speak about the same concerns in terms of sort of the reality for planning for a hemp enterprise or for a hemp farm. What does that look like in California? And is there sort of common sense steps that or approach that can be taken to sort of move cautiously into hemp if that's your desire?
Well, going and farming hemp, as Courtney referenced, it's not like it's some straightforward, simple process. That said, it's also not necessarily rocket science. I mean, there's 3 requirements in California. You need to provide your location, you need to provide your indicate your approved cultivar, and you need to pay a $900 annual fee. But the question is really it begs the question, and we have to look back at history and the recent history, and that is, are you farming in contract or are you farming on speculation? And what we knew going back to the Canadian experience was that if you're farming on spec, it's going to create a glut in the market without sufficient demand, such that it's going to have a deleterious effect, a bad impact on the prices and what's going to happen. We just seemingly went through that similar experience with the gold rush on CBD after the Farm Bill, 2018 Farm Bill, and we saw a crashing of the markets because of the oversupply, the lack of extraction and resourcing, and the ability to get to market. So there has been this kind of pivoting, this constant pivoting in the US marketplace to try to get the highest profit, the highest return on investment as possible, which isn't normal as I understand it, it's just a little bit of a different approach to traditional farming. Traditional farming has reasonable expectations on what they're going to get. Is it a low return, a medium return, or high cash crop, which hemp presumably is. But when we were originally working on the Hemp Farming Act, we were looking at it as a medium to high value crop, but comparing it to strawberries and blueberries and what's the return, almonds and so forth, and comparing it that way. We weren't comparing it to marijuana and what the prices we could get from that, because it's a very different thing. This is an agricultural product. So there's really good news though. We just passed AB 45 and we just opened up the marketplace and the retail shelves where we had a prohibition before. Even though the products were on the shelves, it doesn't mean that they were being allowed there by our regulating agencies, and now they are. And now we've got a real interest, and we are seeing a movement, and as we anticipated, for the retail shelves to open up, the grocers to open up their shelves, and for the big, larger corporations to get involved and bring products to the marketplace. And for example, next in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be going and talking with the Grocers Association, because they're excited. They want to get these products out there, but they want to know how to do it right. And so, anyways, it comes back to having contracts, knowing what you're going to be doing with the crop, having reasonable expectations on it, and looking at the long-term viability of things, not just the short-term fix.
So do either of you, given all of the regulatory and testing considerations and some of the stickier concerns that come along with farming for flower, for CBD or other extracts from hemp, is there are grain and fiber production a safer bet, at least from a hurdles that you have to jump over standpoint for a farmer? I mean, obviously they're completely different products, different value propositions, commanding vastly different products and prices. But if the idea is you want to learn this new crop and get involved with it, is it just a simpler is it a simpler prospect to grow for fiber? And if you can find a contract for a producer somewhere nearby.
I would say from a regulatory standpoint, grain and fiber is definitely easier for everyone. You know, some states are really trying to provide additional benefits to grain and fiber producers over cannabinoid producers, such as Montana, right? They have a category system for seeds and for testing and inspections. And so if you're planting varieties that are traditionally known to be grain varieties that are well below 0.3, only 10% of those farmers are actually getting tested. It saves a lot of money, both for the agency and for the farmers. So I would say from a regulatory perspective, absolutely. I would say from a market perspective, you know, we're in a really exciting time for grain and fiber because we're finally seeing the infrastructure development. You know, there's companies throughout the country that are expanding their grain processing infrastructure. We have some new fiber processing infrastructure that's just coming online. And so I think we have a lot of new opportunities that weren't necessarily there a few years ago. And so I think long term, there's going to be incredible markets for grain and fiber producers.
Yeah, I would, you know, I would add that while flower and cannabinoids are gonna be there and they'll, you know, that's not going away. You know, I'm back to the future in terms of fiber and grain, but in particular fiber. I want that market, those markets to open up. It's the challenge is the infrastructure, and so there needs to be investment. We're talking with the California Hemp Council, amongst the California Hemp Council, how can we create incentives at the state level to get that investment going, to get projects going, research, potential mandates, looking at, you know, can we get Caltrans to do studies to start working with hemp concrete in infrastructure? Can we create incentives, tax breaks to get, you know, the energy production solutions and technology moving forward? But again, it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing, and in order, it's seemingly in order to get things rolling on the fiber in the fiber space, it's going to need some legislative action in the state, and the state's good at that. California, as we know, it leads the way in a lot of environmental issues and areas. So we're gonna keep working on that, but until that is really more in place, it's hard for a farmer to say, okay, well, I'm going to go do fiber production. But you can look at what the folks in the Central Valley are doing, Lawrence Serban and others. They're really working to get those trials going. They've grown the largest hemp, tallest in the world, apparently, in California. It goes to show just what a nice place to grow hemp it is. But is California the appropriate location for vast fiber production? I don't know. Is it better off in the Midwest? But at the same time, this is a public-private partnership, the development of hemp. It was the public action that lumped it together with marijuana in the first place, and that it's responsible for and accountable for helping us to bring it back. And we're going to continue to mandate that public-private partnership and push for it stronger and stronger in California, because gosh darn it, we have no time to lose right now. We're looking at a cliff globally. Humanity is looking at this cliff, and we are the stewards of all things. At least we ought to be. We're not acting as good stewards right now. So we have to really get focused on these. We have to move beyond the flower in our minds. And it's a part of it, but we have to look at things collectively, and what can we continue to do to both advance opportunities for farmers and for jobs and the economy, but also the environment. That's critical.
Great, thanks very much for that, Patrick. how much, I don't know how much more time we have on our little piece of this discussion, but it's really fascinating to hear your perspectives. I think it's worth noting that, along with Colorado, Oregon and California enjoy a very distinct relationship to hemp with respect to having, semi-established legal marijuana markets already in place in their states. And in Colorado, that's similar as well. And that comes with particular advantages, disadvantages. I was hoping to circle back, Patrick, when you mentioned the sort of resistance from initially from the high THC cannabis crowd to some of what was in AB 45. And I know in Oregon, the MJ lobby is a pretty vocal group there in the state capitol as well. Could you guys sort of shed some light on how that dynamic really plays out for producers in the state, the competing interests of those two industries, or working together?
Yeah, I'll respond really quickly, just and speak to kind of the crux of the issue, and I kind of alluded to it. It's just how much THC is in these products, and that, like, a fear of the cannabis manufacturers were that, a liter bottle of beverage or bottle of water would be allowed to have 0.3% THC, and that could provide 125 milligrams or whatever of THC, enough to get people really, really high. And that's being sold outside of the cannabis regulatory marketplace. So what they wanted to do was they wanted a tenth of a milligram THC cap on all products. And we said, no, you're not getting that. But where we crafted the compromise was on, because we work together with the California Cannabis Industries Association, was a core group and core part of our coalition. We crafted a compromise where the final form hemp ingredient going in needs to be less than 0.3% THC, and not necessarily just the entire product. And while that may create some challenges for folks, it was a compromise that we felt was reasonable under the circumstances, and ultimately the cannabis manufacturers dropped their opposition at the end of the day, when the legislation was on the I think it was the assembly floor or something like that. But the point being is that during these processes, we can't just throw up our hands and say, no, we're not going to take that amendment. We're not going to address that issue. You throw your blinders on and your earmuffs on. No, we work. The legislative process is working together to find that middle path that we think that everybody, at least most of us, can live with, because we can't stop our desire for perfection getting in the way of progress. And the only way we progress is by getting these types of legislation passed.
Great point. Yeah, thanks very much. Can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And compromise is always when everybody walks away feeling slightly dissatisfied. So that, just in today's day and age, I think any major legislative achievement is to be celebrated. And this bill, opens up so many opportunities for hemp. Obviously, there's still questions that need to be ironed out, but it is something that I think the industry should be really proud of.
And we'll be continuing to work on it and make it better.
All right, Jody, I'm going to move you into questions now.
Great.
And I want to, there was a question that came up, and Courtney, you gave a really articulate answer in the chat. So I'm hoping that you're not going to make me read that out loud, and you'll repeat that just so we have it on the webinar. But Jeff asked, as a grower, do I follow federal regulations or state regulations, or does it depend on whether I have a federal permit or not? I'm hoping that you can answer that for everybody, so we have it on the webinar.
Yeah, I'll jump in quick with the answer. So the regulations for growers depend on what jurisdiction you're in. What is your state or your tribal government doing? What program do they have in place? And so right now we're in an interesting time because we have authority to operate under both the 2014 Farm Bill or the 2018 Farm Bill. That authority right now is going through January 1st of 2022. There's language in the current appropriations bills to extend that till January of 2023. But many states are still aiming for that January of 2022 deadline. And so I think we are going to see the majority of states transition to the 2018 Farm Bill by this January. And so what that means is that not only is your state determining, are we under 2018 or 2014 Farm Bill, but if you are under the 2018 Farm Bill, has your state or tribal government had a plan approved by the USDA, and then therefore you're operating under that state or tribal plan? Or has your state or tribal government decided to have USDA regulate your production directly, and then you're working directly with USDA on your licensing and your compliance?
Thank you so much. Now, I have another question from Patrick. Do hemp growers have the same rights as food crop producers to use their water rights for cultivating hemp? With increasing constraints, water availability for agricultural purposes, is there a risk that hemp could be determined to be a lower priority crop with regards to water rights? I don't know. Who wants to jump in and get that one?
Well, my initial response would be, it's an agricultural crop is an agricultural crop is an agricultural crop. Marijuana is regulated separately in California because of the federal prohibition, and because it's just a different thing. It's a medicine. Not that hemp can't be a medicine, but it's a medicine used to treat ailments and be used recreationally to get folks intoxicated or enjoy themselves or whatever. It's just a different thing. So in California, the marijuana producers have to deal with the Department of Ag and work on the water issues separately. But as far as hemp goes, there's no, at least in California, there's no separate distinction, and that there's no lesser or greater rights between a blueberry farmer and a hemp farmer. I would imagine, though, that it's different in other states, probably like someplace like Montana or something that maybe Courtney could speak to.
Yeah, I understand it's state by state, or if you have federal water, that's another hurdle. A couple of years ago, we had to work with getting federal authorization for different farms, and we were able to secure that. So, in Oregon, similar to what Patrick said, we have right to farm protections. And so our farmers are not at any sort of disadvantage because they're a hemp farmer and their water rights. Of course, you have to follow your water rights, and whether those are actually being followed is a completely separate issue.
All right, thank you. And probably my favorite question so far, favorite question to ask to cannabis and hemp policy attorneys. If there was a federal law legalizing cannabis tomorrow, would all of the legal issues around hemp go away?
No.
I'd say it depends, right?
That's the short answer. They might. It definitely would be a game changer, and I think it would lead to the evolving, shifting landscape on regulation, because why we've had to work so hard to put all these barriers and requirements in place on hemp is because of its relationship to marijuana. And if marijuana were to be descheduled or unscheduled or fully legalized, then whatever that looks like, it's in my mind, it's going to be left to the states. It's not going to be pushed down the throats of states. Many states, the same with the end of alcohol prohibition. There are dry counties in, I think, where Jack Daniels is produced, it's dry. There will be states that choose not to legalize. There are states that can say, we don't want hemp grown in our state. We can't stop it from traveling through it, but we don't want it grown, and therefore we're going to prohibit it. Like I see the landscape being a patchwork quilt, but it'll definitely soften things when we remove the DEA from the game, because that's when we removed them after the 2018 Farm Bill. Even though they think they're still involved and they continue to try to be involved, they're not. And they understood that for the most part. They're still trying to keep on some form of jurisdiction, assert some form of jurisdiction over things. But look, hey, apparently they think D8 is okay if it comes from hemp. It's a shifting landscape, but it would be a positive one for the hemp farmers.
Great. I've got, I do have a specific California question that I want to get out here. And I'm probably.
Oh no, it's Courtney's turn. Sorry. Just kidding.
Courtney, you got California. Congratulations. Regarding the new California bill addressing regulation of industrial hemp and CBD and consumables, will industrial hemp growers be subject to the same lab testing and tolerances of pesticides, heavy metals, et cetera, as cannabis?
Well, okay. So as I mentioned earlier, while the farmers aren't required to conduct those tests, the product manufacturers will be required to. So then it really follows that it's in the best interest of farmers to be paying attention to what is required on that side, and to be similarly testing their product because they want to be able to sell it, and in most cases it's going to be sold to folks that want to create these products. So while it's not mandated on the front end, intelligence would indicate that you ought to be testing for it to know what's in it, so it's not rejected when you are trying to sell it.
Thank you. And we are just about out of time, but I got a question from my associate Catherine that looks important to me, so I'm going to pose this to you, Courtney. All throughout this webinar series, we've been discussing the importance of farmers and producers having a clear buyer or plan for what they're going to do with the crop. And the specific question is, what is the legal recourse if a buyer does not fulfill a contract for hemp farmers, which we know we saw a lot of that in the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, the importance, I think, of having the contract, right, is that you're not just putting a plant in the ground hoping that you're going to find a buyer, right? That you have some security in what you're doing with your crop, right? But there's been so many issues that have come up, and I mean, it's a breach of contract. And so it depends, what was your contract? What did the contract say? And, you're going to go through a traditional breach of contract.
One thing to add there is that to consider is litigation is expensive, and so how could that be mitigated? Get mediation provisions in contracts, get perhaps an arbitration provision in there, single arbitrator. Don't get into these like triple arbitrators, that like an mutually agreed upon arbitrator. That's going to cut your costs in litigation. Mediation is always, I'm a big fan. I'm a mediator. I'm a big fan of it as long as there's buy-in from both sides. But there's, just think about trying to reduce the amount of cost of litigation to the best extent possible. And the way to do that is in the contract.
Thank you, guys. So, Jody, sorry, I look like I cut you off. Did you have something to add?
Not really. I was just nodding in agreement. I mean, it's true that the industry really is rebalancing right now. Farmers are in the process of recalibrating expectations, but it's, the reality is the industry is a little ways off from being a mature, developed market, and a long ways off from being a robust agricultural commodity.
Well, I want to personally say I'm not sure how many folks on this webinar today are aware of this, but we've been fortunate that not only did Courtney and Patrick afford us some of their time today, They are, in fact, two of the people that we can legitimately say we are here because of them and their work over the last 20 years. So personally, as someone who's benefited from your work, I would like to thank you not only for joining us today, but for all of your tireless efforts for helping us grow this new agricultural industry. And I just thank you guys all for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Michael. That means a lot.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you so much.
All right, now I'm going to move us into the federal piece of this. And for this next section of our webinar, it actually, we had a little change up this morning. So I do want to just quickly, everybody send your best thoughts out to Jamie Campbell Petty, who wasn't able to join us today for a family emergency. So I just want to acknowledge that we've had a little bit of a pivot. So we're down a panelist, but I'm pretty sure that the next two guys with us, Jody and Blake, can take up the time for us and provide us with a lot of good information. For this next section of our webinar, we're going to have a panel discussion with actually now two of the leading hemp policy experts to discuss where the U.S. is in terms of federal regulation and where we think it's heading. We do have with us again, Jody McGinness. Thank you so much for your time. I did your introduction earlier, so I'm not going to do it again. But Jody, just for those that join us late, is the executive director of the Hemp Industries Association. And we're also joined today by Blake Butler from North Carolina. Blake has been involved in the political, business, and activist side of industrial hemp industries since 2014. Blake has organized educational events in North Carolina, South Carolina, Kentucky, and he is a partner in the Industrial Hemp Summit, which is an annual B2B hemp event held in Danville, Virginia. Blake served as the executive director of the North Carolina Industrial Hemp Association from December of 2018 until November of 2020, and is now currently the executive director of the Southeast Hemp Association, which is a multi-state 501c6 trade association. And with that, I'm going to stop my share and hand it back off to these two esteemed colleagues.
Oh, it's nice to be esteemed.
Definitely.
Blake, good to see you, sir. If it's okay with you, I'd like to take this opportunity just to talk a little bit about the HIA to get some context about the perspective that I'm speaking from, but also sort of to so that when you talk about your organization, we can sort of people will understand how those interact, if that makes sense.
That sounds good to me.
So as Mike graciously mentioned, I'm the executive director of the Hemp Industries Association. The Hemp Industries Association is nearly 30-year-old organization founded way back when I was still in high school, founded by a group of mostly fiber producers in the United States who were interested in getting fake or substandard hemp textile and hemp apparel products off the market. So they came together to establish some standards. And back then, since hemp was illegal, everything was being imported, and nobody was farming hemp at all. So this organization existed as a sort of twinkle in the industry's eye, or the industry existed in a twinkle of the HIA's eye for most of its life. And what it did during that time was focus on education and activism through publicity stunts, activism campaigns, letter writing, signatures, consumer education campaigns that reached into hundreds of stores around the country every year to celebrate the history of hemp and focus on the incredible nutritional value of hemp and distinct nature and value of hemp products. Long before CBD came on the scene, those were the things that the HIA was doing. But our members have always been businesses who wanted to do more than just make a profit. We have members who are businesses and farmers. We have a mission that's about focusing on the way hemp benefits the planet and people. And built into our articles of incorporation is a focus on human rights and sustainable business practices. So the HIA really is sort of a do-gooders mechanism for business leaders and farmers who want to make the most out of this industry in terms of sustainable development. And we are really glad to partner and affiliate with great groups that are doing the hard work on the front lines at the grassroots level, like the Southeast Hemp Association, of which my colleague Blake is the head. I'll stop talking now, but just want to say I'm grateful for the opportunity to NCAT to be here and share what I can about the national outlook for hemp. And thanks to Mike as well for the invitation.
Yes, thank you, NCAT, and thank you, Mike Lewis, and everyone for allowing me to be part of this session. It's very important as we continue to share best practices and what we've learned in our respective states. The Southeast Hemp Association, quite simply, is a 501c6 trade association that represents growers, retailers, processors, everybody in the supply chain. We used to be the North Carolina Industrial Hemp Association, but we had our first challenge 4 years ago when it came to federal regulations and state law, as our legislators tried to ban smokable hemp. Now, at that time, we had 800 registered hemp growers in North Carolina, and 799 of them had planted hemp for floral purposes, for smokable hemp. So we had to go out and protect those folks. We were the only state in the nation that won this battle without using the courts. And the reason that I mention that is because we use something that we all believe in, is we went back to the very people that supported our agricultural community from the beginning. Because as we've embraced this new agricultural commodity and as we graduate up to the federal level, we have to remember there's so many respective states that built their economies off of agriculture. And for us, we see this as a bioregional opportunity again. We see how North Carolina and Virginia partnered with tobacco. We see how North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia partnered with textiles. So we start to envision what we can really do with the plant on the industrial side, continue to explore it on the federal side, and really, as I've seen the chat, how we can get this silly interstate commerce or all these problems worked out and start to see this as a true opportunity. Folks, I'm not going to lie to you. I've been in 8 years and it's been tough. It's still tough. And as you've heard everybody say, now that we're going towards the USDA and getting closer to the USDA, I can tell you that the growers in our association aren't excited about it because it's a really, really big change for them. And not only submitting an FBI background check, which they feel demonized again, but still not having much guidance after the Farm Bill is what happens after pre-harvest. And I think that as we discuss all these things, that's something to remember and keep in mind for all these attendees. The only thing we have at the federal level is the Farm Bill that stops at pre-harvest. We have nothing else for guidance to what to do with the plant and create a safe supply chain for every consumer. And all of us on this call, I can tell you, we want that oversight. We want that acceptance eventually. So as we talk about, I think these federal regulations, believe me, even though some folks are frustrated, there is some silver lining in it as we get closer to the USDA, as we are able to work closer with the USDA and hopefully, start a better open communication line with the FDA.
Yeah. Thanks for that insight. There's a bunch of things that you said in there that I think are worth jumping off and talking about. But the first thing that I think really draws my attention is this idea of bioregionality. A lot of what has been problematic for the crop out of the gate has been things like crops, going hot or passing that THC limit, unreliable genetics, a lack of tried and true farming practices. I mean, just a lack of trade practice with this crop, which can be, tricky and labor intensive and requires a heck of a lot of space for storage, for drying, all these concerns that are sort of new problems. How much do growers in your region, how much can they benefit from sharing, from looking up from that those artificial state borders and figuring out what their neighbors are doing and building those relations? How does, why is regionality so the natural form that this industry is sort of forming into?
Well, I think, even though we have these artificial state borders, we still have similar soil across those borders, a similar temperate zone. And so what we see is farmers are starting to share what seeds work best in which parts of the state. Because again, if this is declared an agricultural commodity, let's see it as such. How do we actually grow it in each respective state, transport it? As Jody knows, I'm big on the railroads, really big on the railroads. Why don't we tap back in to that infrastructure and those tributaries to craft this interstate commerce as we transport hemp and maybe one day cannabis around? The reason I mention that, a lot of what we need is right in front of us. It really is the wheel. I mean, I've learned so much more about good agricultural practices from Mike Lewis by going up to Kentucky multiple times that had nothing to do with hemp. But what it opened my eyes at is what we were looking for was right in front of us. We just need to tap right back into the very knowledge that built some of our economies in these small towns and the salt of the earth folks, the farmers, the growers, and how, as professionals, can we figure out to support them? I can tell you that a lot of our growers in our states that we represent need more guidance, need more assistance. Even when you apply for the USDA, folks, you have to go to the hemp e-management platform. Now, you can imagine for a 65-year-old hemp farmer having to go onto an e-platform, having to submit his FBI background check. I mean, these are things that are brand new, kind of confusing, kind of scary, where we used to have somebody we could call in Raleigh and say, hey, what's the deal? My crop went, what's about remediation? Now it's a little bit further away from us with, the USDA. And North Carolina is an example of a state that Courtney mentioned before, decided not to submit any state plan. So our growers must apply under the USDA to be able to grow hemp on January 1st, 2022. The real difference, I will tell you, is not only the testing is not run by the state anymore. All our growers, again, in North Carolina, use that as an example, have to go out and find a certified sampling agency that's certified and approved by the USDA. That's one. And the second thing is you go, so the farm service agencies know how many acres of hemp you've actually planted. Remember, everything's changed. We're under that federal umbrella. Now we're reporting to those agencies at that federal level.
Yeah, there is some education that's going to need to be done for those states that are switching over. That's a really valid point. Some of on the plus side, it's a 2-year license. So you don't have to do it every year, right? In some states, depending on how much they were charging for licensing and fees, the USDA option might be less of an upfront, or at least paperwork costs for farmers. So,
there's no license or applications fees, as you know, Jody. But again, some of the things you have to go through, and some of the hoops you have to jump through, people are finding a little bit cumbersome.
Well, so this goes back to the 2018 Farm Bill and all its wonders and imperfections, right? And this is a lesson this industry has learned, like many before it, that no piece of legislation is perfect, and it's frequently the unintended consequences of your goal, legislative, of achieving your goal that you didn't account for, that end up shaping the contours of your industry. So, for instance. The question of Delta 8, it's created by the specification in the Farm Bill that defined hemp based on its Delta 9 THC content, and specifying Delta 9 THC left the door open to other versions of THC from hemp. So that's an unintended consequence. What other unintended consequences are you seeing, or have aside from a general lack of usability from a farmer's standpoint? From a federal regulatory standpoint, does it come with less support? I mean, you said you could call somebody up at the state level before, so now you can't get somebody on the phone, or is that not really an apple? Is it apples and oranges?
Well, I think, you just state by state, you get to know those folks that work in the Department of Ag, work in those respective hemp departments. And now you'll be really sending a lot of emails using technology to communicate with the USDA. I mean, I encourage everybody to get familiar with the USDA's marketing hemp service portion of their website. And I'll post that link here in a minute for everybody. And you can kind of look through it. And we're telling all our growers to do that. I'll say this, and I'll just, if I can take just a minute to kind of explain my thinking. When I got into this, I thought after we started planning that a priority would be for the FDA to come in and be sure that all the products we were making were safe for consumption. And that's never happened. And that to me is truly disappointing, because we need that for our folks to not only survive, but find sustainability and new opportunities in this business to get in the supply chain. So an unintended consequences, unfortunately, Jody, I think we fought hard for what we want and what we need. But unfortunately, other priorities have gotten in the way. And even though we thought with the Farm Bill, a lot of things would be in motion, we still see that banking is a problem.
Yeah,
we still see that interstate commerce is a problem. So we still have a lot of work to do. The other thing I'll say is this, and I mentioned it earlier, it can be a positive the closer we get to the USDA and maybe have more opportunities to sit with the FDA and others. I think that this is one of these things that every time that I have an opportunity to go to DC, and I'll see Jody in a couple of weeks at a conference and just talk with any congressional representative about why we need help at this point, to see us face to face and see the passion and the belief that we're still here while other states are quickly turning and giving up. We're not. We've got some good people in this industry that want to do some good for the consumer and our country. We want to create a new agricultural opportunity for everyone. And all we need is a little bit of congressional push to say, hey, we got these guys under federal programs. Let's start providing some federal guidance to help them in the supply chain. And I really mean that. And I'm going to carry that message up there in a couple of weeks. It's important. And it's beyond everything else other than we know how valuable this side of the plan is. We know how many things we can make with this side of the plan. We know where we can change little micro economies throughout our nation, but we cannot do it without congressional support and a buy-in from enough states. Because right now, when people say to me, hey, who are the really successful states in hemp, Blake? Tell me who's really successful. Folks, it's hard. It's really hard because it's a little fragmented, as you.
Little bit, yeah. So this might be the right place to talk about what could be happening legislatively inside the Beltway in DC. There are some hemp bills out there that seek to smooth over some of these thornier bits. There's a piece of legislation that's been kicking around for a few years in one form or another in the Safe Banking Act, which looks like it might be making, it was recently wrapped into the Defense Appropriations Bill, which is probably as likely to get passed as anything else. So if it makes it through all of the conferences and what have yous, we could see some relief. And so for those not familiar, despite the fact that hemp was removed from the federal schedule in 2018, and the legality of this crop is not in question, but as long as it's under that 0.3% threshold, hemp businesses and CBD businesses still continue to be to suffer in various ways in the banking and financial services sector. Everything from the abrupt closure of accounts and freezing of assets while disputes are resolved, to higher rates on a transaction basis for every credit card processing charge that you have, to interruptions of the services that link all those together for your business. So it's still an epidemic that affects businesses large and small in different ways, and there are more banks and companies moving in to fill this niche. But the reality is federal legislation is needed to make banks, especially the biggest banks, which are some of the most conservative, financially risk-averse conservative institutions in the world, from feeling comfortable treating anything that's part of the cannabis plant as a normal business proposition. They need that federal legislation. So the Safe Banking Act, probably the most likely thing to happen next in DC legislation for the industry. And like I said, being part of the defense bill makes that the best bet of anything to get through is spending for the defense bill. So that could happen.
There's other things going on up there too, Jody. I think you really will probably see maybe a federal push next year for marijuana legalization in an election year. I've been told by some pretty good resources that's going to be part of one of the party's platforms. It is already being discussed in detail in caucus, as well as, a lot of groups believe that if we could get Congress to change the Farm Bill and redefine hemp as 1%, that might cure some of our problems, because it might force the hand, per se, of the FDA and others to say, well, we got to go ahead and get involved with these hemp guys because they've got this threshold of 1%. And when we talk about this to all the attendees, and again, a lot of our processors and product makers out there are asking for this, as they move to GMP certifications, and they want to go to neutral pharmaceutical grade. They're asking, like, where do we go to get that stamp so people know that we're creating safe products? So I think somewhere in all of this matrix, we might find a little bit more synergy with the federal agencies as we move closer on these issues. But I've heard from a couple of resources that the FDA would rather just wait till federal legalization to do anything with the plant. But, again, I think it's going to be a mixed bag. We'll find out a little bit more, hopefully, in a couple of weeks. We're going to have the head of the USDA there, Bill Richmond, as well as a couple of the FDA commissioners. As you know, we don't have a FDA chief. Nobody wants that job with everything that's going on. But just to let you know, we don't have anybody head of the FDA right now. But at the same time, yeah, it would be good to touch base with those guys as much as possible. So
one bill that might actually force the FDA's hand is HR 841, which the U.S. Hemp Roundtable has been working very heavily on inside the Beltway. It has bipartisan support. And anything in today's Washington that has credibly bipartisan support has, better than even odds of some progress. But it's been picking up continued co-sponsors. And what 841 would do if it gets passed is, among other things, direct the FDA to regulate CBD like a nutritional supplement. So it still wouldn't cover the food additive, or in food and beverages, but in pills or like that nutraceutical form I think we were just talking about, it would give the FDA the congressional whack on the tail feather to get moving on that. And there's a more ambitious version of the bill, a more ambitious CBD bill in the Senate that does the same, but also includes the food and beverages element. And recently, a bill was previewed that takes on a lot of these regulatory challenges, and also does something that the HIA believes strongly in, which is to remove the 10-year felony ban from the strictures around hemp. So by context, for those of you not familiar, part of the farm bill that legalized hemp said that anybody who had a felony conviction within 10 years would not be able to get a license. So essentially blocking out anybody who had a drug conviction for 10 years from getting involved in hemp. Now, to say nothing of the fact that that's not necessary, because hemp is not a drug and the two worlds don't need to be assumed to overlap. We all know that the inequities of the war on drugs have fallen more harshly on communities of color and underserved communities throughout this country. As a result, conviction rates for smaller possession and drug-related crimes have been higher in minority communities for years. Statistically speaking, if you're a minority, you're more likely to get a much harsher sentence for any kind of drug crime throughout the United States. So as a result, with that 10-year felony ban, it's effectively blocking out those communities that have been most ravaged by the war on drugs from the entrepreneurial opportunities the hemp industry represents. It was an onerous provision stuck in there to appease some of the more revanchist supporters of the Farm Bill at the time, and even the people on our side who were, there was it was going to be a lot worse before they successfully softened it. So I don't mean to diminish the work of incredible allies and activists who made the Farm Bill happen, but that 10-year felony ban really represents an original sin of the industry, and the sooner it can be removed and stop creating an institutional barrier to participation from underserved communities, the better off the hemp industry will be.
I agree with that. And, just to come full circle again, as we look at all this interaction up in DC, this is probably a pivotal point for our industry in the next year as we figure out where we're going to go and what we're going to be. And what I mean by that is not only how the pie will be split up, but how serious are we about exploring industrial hemp? How serious are we about fiber and grain? And the reason I say that is there's tens of millions of dollars out there for growers to plant fiber and grain and start running research projects. But in reality, it's hard to talk a lot of growers into that if they don't see opportunities and a buyer on the horizon. And I've told everybody, as we explore other avenues for the plants, the main thing we can't do is make the mistakes we've made previously by putting the cart before the horse. Let's be sure before we get growers involved, and Mike Lewis, you can shake your hand, that these opportunities are true, these opportunities are realized, and they're sustainable.
Should I be looking at these questions here, I guess? Let's see. Mike, you answered the one about organic certification.
I want to back you up, Jody.
Yes, sir.
I want to back you up. I put off one of Jeff's questions earlier because I thought it would be better suited for this. And then I'll let you have the floor back, but I just wanted to make sure we got to it because I thought it was important. We hear a lot of talk, everybody talking about the difference between the federal and state programs. And how does that relate to the interstate commerce clause? Because it seems to stand to reason that if the crop is federally legal, then why are there interstate transport issues? And I think that's the crux of Jeff's question.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I'm nervous giving an answer with two legal minds like Courtney and Patrick here on the line because these are delicate questions. So, and by that I mean hemp is federally legal; it's descheduled. It's not a scheduled product anymore. But is CBD legal federally? It depends what you mean by legal. Technically, there still remain outstanding regulatory requirements that need to be met by the FDA in order to iron out those thorny interstate commerce clause considerations. So while everybody is fully aware that CBD is obviously being shipped across state lines, whatever, from the FDA standpoint, from a federal legal standpoint, you can't really claim that that the legal stamp fits even on CBD, let alone into other extracts like Delta 8 or D10 or anything else. So that vacuum is part of what Blake was talking about, and sort of what has happened in California that is so remarkable is you have a state. The FDA is supposed to be the expert, the one that all of the little laboratories of democracy take their cues from. But you have the state of California stepping up to do what the FDA hasn't, to fill in those blanks, to take on these complicated regulatory, scientific, and market questions and come up with solutions, or at least try to put solutions on the walls of the stick. So it's not everybody benefits from that, and a lot of the profit that's being made in the extract side of this industry is being made in a gray market environment where it's not entirely clear under what authority the product is being sold, or whether or not it should have been shipped across state lines without this regulation already ironed out through the FDA. So that creates an interesting dynamic, and lawyers frequently advise their clients to keep their head down, which can be particularly challenging when you're trying to represent an industry in a legal case against the DEA in response to their action or their rule on hemp. and trying to rally support from an industry that's being told to keep its head down and not make any noise because everything is not clear at the federal level. Oh, Mike, did you freeze up on me? I hope that was ended.
No, we got you. I was just on mute.
Oh, okay. Oh, there you go.
Well, that's all I had, so I'll defer back to you two. I just wanted to make sure we got that question in for Jeff.
I wanted to put in a plug real quick, just to anybody who's listening or will be watching this in the future. Every state has its own website and resources. And the reason that we didn't get too specific into details about any given process that anybody should follow is you really want to start there with your state program resources. They'll have the forms, the schedules, and in many cases, if you're lucky, you have a state that's provided training videos and webinars and all types of other valuable information. Likewise, there are great educational resources out there like NCAT and others to help provide answers. But from a regulatory standpoint, you always want to start with that state website and follow from there. If all else fails, you can always try shooting an email to the HIA, and we will try and find you some answers and get you some assistance if you need it.
So I have another question, but I think Blake, I'm sure you can help us understand who is responsible for the destruction of hot hemp.
Oh, hot hemp.
I don't know, Jeff, are you volunteering or take some off your hands?
That actually, Mike, is it.
Did you lock up, Blake?
Well, he just bailed and he just went black screen. So I think I can pick up where Blake. There he is.
Okay, sorry about that. That was funny. I said it state by state. Plant or regulations really govern what happens with hot hemp. Some states are a little bit more open-minded when it comes to remediation per se, and others are not. Like North Carolina, we either bury it or burn it. But I will say that's another reason that people argue for 1%. This 0.03% threshold is crazy, and that our growers should be able to remediate their crops. I mean, no one is purposely trying to break the law here, but yes, we planted some genetics on the east side of the Mississippi that we got from the West Coast, everybody, that went hot. So there you go. It wasn't anybody intended to do it, but at the same time, we shouldn't let that grower lose everything. So, I mean, yes, it's a state by state. It's wrapped in those state laws. But now, I mean, those with the USDA, when it goes hot, it's going to be destroyed. There's specific ways it can be handled on the USDA's website now.
And I mean, I've had to burn fiber crops in Kentucky in the past because they were hot. Who pays, Jeff? That's on you. The producer pays for the destruction of the crop. At least I did.
So with respect to I guess the point there that you were making, Blake, is that states that were still following the 2014 Farm Bill, the research-based program, the reporting requirements at the federal level were a lot, and the control at the federal level was a lot looser. So states that moved to the 2018 plan or their own plan, or I'm sorry, the USDA's plan or their own plan under 2018's bill, they've seen a tightening and a new strictures like you described. Like previously, the disposal of those crops was there was a little more leeway there, but now with this new plan, it's going to be strictly controlled. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think states saw it differently. They're on the 2014 bill of how to remediate. But again, I come back to the same thing. I don't think any hemp farmer is planting hemp for it to go hot. We should work with them. They should not be on the losing end of that. So, I mean, the early problems the industry's had with reliable genetics to seeds, coupled with
the lack of knowledge. I mean, there's still a debate, and I hesitate to bring it up, but there's still people on both sides of the question of what makes plants go hot. Is it just a genetics thing, or do environmental and handling conditions play a role that increase the THC content? Although I think that the science is getting pretty clear that it's mostly genetics. But how is that resolving from, I mean, is it just the market that if a state decides who the legit seed retailers are or the seed sellers are, if the state says, here's who you can buy from, how much does the state how much responsibility do they bear for crops that didn't go hot because the seeds weren't planted?
Yeah, that's a good question. We did have a couple of cases like that again, the state was more hands off. They said, we're sorry. You know, unfortunately, it's the way it is. Even though they were a certified seed dealer, we had no idea where they actually shipped you. And even though there was a COA that they tested so many seeds in the bag. But I will say this, Jody, and this is real important to everybody on this call. We have
But it was really important.
Important.
freeze again.
Yeah.
Just right when you
Okay,
paused,
sorry,
there's something
everybody.
really important.
All right, real fast. I think it's getting ready to storm here real fast. What I was going to say is that, you know, I forgot what I was going to say now. Well, I'll just say this, you know, Jody, you know, from our vantage point again, as we look at hemp and the opportunity and who plants, all these farmers are getting smart now in the sense that they're moving indoors so they can control the variables, they can control the conditions, they don't have to deal with Mother Nature. And I'll just tell you, we see a dramatic shift of hemp growers going indoors now so they can harvest 3 times a year as opposed to 1 and control the very problems we discussed.
So that's a really great point, Blake, because, you know, we talk about the HIA represents all types of plant, all the different industries involved in hemp, but industrial hemp, which doesn't really have a defined term for what that means depending on who you ask, but really it generally means hemp grown for grain or fiber, and made to be grown to turn into products, whereas what we're seeing is a horticultural industry developing around flower, right? People moving to indoor greenhouse grows, cultivating distinct, you know, flavonoid and terpene profiles, and, you know, biochemical structures, and really creating incredibly rich flowers that, you know, could never survive in nature through, you know, things like vertical farming and stuff. So it's so that segment of the industry, that CBD and extract segment, even the farming practice is developing on its own distinct track. And in a lot of ways, there's not going to be a lot of overlap there. I mean, you could conceivably have an indoor grow for flower and more safely grow fiber outside without worrying about cross-pollination and stuff. But really, if you're in the bag for flower, do you have capacity to do other types of hemp? Or isn't it pretty much going to be either or for most, you know, small to medium-sized farmers?
We'll see. I think that part of the market is still developing, Jody. So we will see how a lot of that, you know, breaks out on the East Coast and in the Southeast. But I'll say this one thing about fiber in particular, as I mentioned before, to not make the same mistakes. As we talk about hempcrete building and the other opportunities, let's go ahead and engage the Association of Home Builders. Let's go ahead and engage the Association of Architects. I deal with building inspectors all the time that says, Blake, hemp lime or hempcrete isn't in my manual. Well, that's where we have to come in and remember there's associations out there, and I see Zev shaking his head. He knows that can help us with that credibility factor to see some of these. And we're going to have to do a lot of this legwork, folks. Don't get me wrong. It's not going to be easy. A lot of this legwork to see it through. But remember, there's trade associations out there that can help us with some of these industrial opportunities, and not so much on the floral side, just because the industrial opportunities get into all sorts of sectors that we've never taken the plan into.
Yeah.
All right. Time's up, gentlemen.
Oh,
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. And I'll put my email in the comment section if you want to email me any questions. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, NCAT.
thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Had a great time.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys taking the time. Again, everybody, these are leaders in the industry and helped us get to where we are. So we really appreciate them taking their time out today. I want to move into our next session, which is seed selection for meeting compliance. And our next presenter is Zev Paiss of RhizoVerified, and he's going to be discussing seed selection for meeting quality standards and maintaining compliance, also selecting genetics for your area and verifying that your seed sellers do what they say. Zev, as a quick background, began his involvement with industrial hemp in late 2012, shortly after Colorado became the first state to fully allow farmers to grow this crop. He was the founding executive director of the Rocky Mountain Hemp Association and then the National Hemp Association from 2013 to the end of 2016. He has developed a national network of farmers, extractors, processors, equipment manufacturers, testing laboratories, investors, hemp organizations, and buyers of hemp products. Zev serves as an active advisor to farmers, processors, and organizations, including RhizoVerified, Agricultural Claims Association, the Texas Hemp Harvesters Association, and as a subject matter expert to the Family Farm Group. He's also the chair of the Hemp Industries Association Fiber Council and supports the needs of member involvement in all aspects of growing, processing, and manufacturing finished hemp fiber and herd products. He's also the chief operating officer of Abraham Paiss and Associates Incorporated, a sustainability focused agency supporting an increasing sustainable future since 1996, and obviously the guy I should go to for my next bio. Zev, thank you so much. It's great to have you here.
So I think I got kicked off, but I'm right back on again. So it's great to be here. So I missed a little bit of the introduction, but I probably know what it is anyway. So I am focusing, as you said, on the seed part of this. And I just want to make it really clear to everyone that, you know, this industry is extremely new, as you all know. And because of that, there's just a lot that's not figured out yet. And you've been hearing about it for the last couple of hours. And I want to thank everyone who's already presented, because there's a phenomenal amount of information that has been given out, you know, very helpful. A lot of it is something that it varies from state to state. So you're going to need to check in on your local state. And that's also very true for seeds. So what I'm going to be talking about, three main topics. So one is just the challenges with hemp seeds at this point in the industry. The second is maintaining compliance in several different ways. And then the third is finding trustworthy seed sellers. You know, how can you do that? How can you minimize the risk of being able to find seeds that are going to do what you expect them to do, what you need them to do in your location? So the first thing is the challenge of hemp seeds at this point. You know, when you go out to a cornfield, or when you go out and you drive past a cornfield, it all looks identical. I mean, it's like clones. That's how we kind of created that version in the hemp space so far. But the reality is that what you're seeing is like 100 years of genetic selection. Pretty much all, not high tech, except very recently, but very little of it is all, I should say the vast majority of it is just year after year selecting for certain qualities, for certain varieties. There are a lot of different varieties of corn, probably way more than I even know about. But you're looking at a huge body of research that allowed the farmer to do that, to grow something that they know pretty much exactly of what it's going to grow. And we are at the other end of the spectrum when it comes to hemp seeds. You can see behind me there is a kind of a real close-up of some hemp seeds. And if you just look at those seeds behind me, look how different they are. And sometimes it has to do with the level of maturity. Sometimes it has to do with the actual variety. I know early on in the first few years, especially here in Colorado, farmers had no idea what they were planting. And it was very difficult to find out. So trying to to get seed that is stable is extremely challenging right now. The other is that when you go to buy hemp seeds, you should be getting a COA, and it's going to say a variety of things on that. There should be test results from some kind of a verifiable seed lab, one of the universities or one of the companies that has been doing this for quite a while. So there should be some testing that you can get your hands on. The question, unfortunately, is the test results you're looking at, what does a COA mean? It means a certificate of analysis. Thank you, Jeff. So it basically shows a variety of test results depending on what was submitted. Sometimes they're looking for the different cannabinoids in flower, but in seed, it's much more focused because there's no cannabinoids in the seed. So the kind of testing that is typically done would be for germination rates, feminization rates, again, depending on what kind of seeds you're trying to plant, and also purity. How either noxious seeds, noxious weeds, or other kinds of material in the seeds that you're getting. So the problem is that if a farmer is taking their seeds out and essentially sending it to some place, you have no idea how they got those seeds, how they selected those seeds, and also you have no idea whether or not they sent in one test or 20 tests, and the results you're looking at is going to be one or maybe a couple depending on what they make available to you. So the issue of cherry picking test results is very common, unfortunately. So it adds to the unknowability of exactly what it is that you've got. The third thing that is really challenging is that even if you get seeds that are really high quality from a reputable breeder, and that you're growing it in a place that they know is going to do well, the challenge for the farmers is that they also have to know what they're doing. And in a number of states, as this goes out nationally, a number of states, these farmers are brand new. They may be brand new farmers, period, and don't know what's involved in actually planting and growing a row crop or a field crop. But also they may be experienced farmers who just have never grown hemp before. And on top of that, hemp is an extremely variable plant, adaptable plant. So a seed that is grown or that's bred in California and planted in California is not necessarily going to do the same thing, is probably for sure not going to do exactly the same thing if it's grown in Florida or Arizona or Minnesota. So the location of where you are at is really, really important. And that's one of the advices that I would give, is make sure that you understand what the conditions are in your location, and ask the farmer, ask the breeder, whether or not they have done trials in your location. This past year, RhizoVerified is an independent seed verification company. So our focus is to go and sample the seeds in the appropriate AOSCO or ISTA way, the American Society of Seed Analysts, or the International Seed Testers Association. So the idea is to get the seeds in that have been selected correctly, and see whether or not they're going to grow well in your location. So I'll take that to move into compliance, and of course I'm going to leave room at the end for questions. But in terms of compliance, again, it is a state by state issue, because neither the FDA nor the USDA really deals with seed specifically. Some states, though, have gone quite a bit down the road of beginning to dictate exactly what's okay. So in some states, your seed cultivar, that variety, needs to be on their approved list. In a place like Florida, they only allow, at least at this point, they only allow seeds that have been AOSCA certified. So that these are seeds that have gone through AOSCA, their process of going through and testing and making sure that they they germinate, and they have feminization rates that are in compliance, or at least that are expected for what the breeder has said it was going to do. So you really do need to find out what constraints, if any, are on your state growing requirements. Now, a number of people are bringing in, I know fiber and grain seeds have been talked about quite a bit. A lot of those have a long history in other places, be it Canada or different parts of Europe. And a number of those breeders have gotten to the point where they now grow certified seed. And that's a process that they have to go through with their own location, either nationally or statewide. And so when you order those seed, you'll get a bag of seeds that already have the certification on it, that are already listed, and you can feel pretty confident that you are getting certified seed. But the question still is, what exactly is that going to do in my location, my soil, my water quality, my elevation? There's just so many factors that has an effect on the final result of the seed. So take the time, as Blake has been saying and others have been saying, you've got to educate yourself. You need to understand what is allowed in your location, and what has already been tested in your location. And if not, welcome to the R&D part of this industry. I mean, we're all in the R&D state of this industry. This past year, when Rhizo was contacting farmers in states that were brand new, a lot of those farmers really just ordered a very small amount of seed, which I think is very wise, or a very small amount of several different kinds of seed. And they plant them and are essentially doing their own seed trials, because we are the ones that have to figure out what's going to work best, not only for the products that we're trying to grow for, but also in our location for a variety of reasons. A lot of places only allow, the weather only allows the climate one season per year, but that's not true everywhere. There's certainly some places where you can get a couple seasons. Florida is considered a year round, except for those few months where those pesky hurricanes show up. So for the most part, there are places where you can grow more than one crop, but again, you need to go through the testing and need to figure out what makes the most sense. The other thing is that once you've got plants that have emerged correctly, you really do need to start testing early and often, as we say. So as soon as the flowers begin to emerge, especially if you're growing for cannabinoids or for smokable or oil processing, you really do want to start testing early. And as has already been mentioned, each state has a different, or many states have different requirements and different things that are available then. You might be able to have the state do the testing. You may have a variety of private labs or university labs that are available, or you may have, if you're under the USDA directly, you may have only a couple of options in terms of what's possible. But the point is, please start testing early and really keep track of that, because as you get closer to that new 0.3% total THC, which is what the USDA's requirement under the 2018 Farm Bill, you're going to really not want to go over that limit. And it really varies. It's not a science. It's much more of an art. And those cannabinoids start to really spike near the end, so you'll want to keep really close track of that. The third part that I'm going to cover here is, how do I find trustworthy seed sellers? And I have a resource that I turned into NCAT, which is a seed buyer checklist that RhizoVerified offers. I think we're going to make that available to everybody. And it's really just an idea, a list of questions that you want to be asking someone that you're considering buying seeds from. So this it really is a variety of things, but part of it is, get on the phone and get someone at that company on the phone and really talk to them. Ask hard questions. If they have trouble answering hard questions, hang up. That's not the kind of people you want to be working with. And we want to keep professionalizing all aspects of the industry, but certainly the seed buying part. Because there's really no oversight or very little regulation, you need to take on more responsibility. So understand who they are. Find out about the company. How long have they been around? What's their background? Who's on the team? Do they have people, agronomists or geneticists that have actually been doing this work for a while? But understand, what the company is all about and what they're doing. Find out how long they've been doing hemp. I mean, there's companies out there who have been doing seeds for decades, but hemp may be very, very new. So really understand what it is that what their experience is around hemp. The other is have they any experience growing their cultivars, their varieties in different parts of the country? Because a number of them are moving in that direction because they know that it can do really different things in different types of climate. So the more experienced companies are certainly going to have some experience with that. And I think as we move forward, we're going to see more and more of that. You also want to get test results. And as I said earlier, those test results may or may not be accurate, may not be, they may be cherry picked. They could be real specific in terms of the ones that they think are the best ones. Ideally, it would be best to have an independent verification service come in and do the testing for them so that that they've selected it. I would ask them questions about how did you select those seeds? I mean, there are very specific long-standing standards on how you get a representative sample, because very often they're going to have 1 million to 50 million seeds from a specific lot, from a specific harvest. So how do you get a representative sample of seed from that? There are very well documented, I've got books because I'm trained as an AOSCA seed certifier and an ISTA, which is the international version, on how do you go through, depending on how many containers it is and how many seeds overall, how many different samples you need to take from that entire lot, mix them up, get a composite, take from that composite, and then send that off to the seed lab. So ask them how they do that, because that'll give you an idea of how sophisticated they are. And a lot of these companies are still really young, they're new, they're small, and they may just not know what to do. So the best thing you can do is to pick companies that have, that you feel the best about, that the answers they're giving you make sense, and that they feel like they say they're saying the right things. I think that's probably most of what I wanted to talk about. I think I've got about 10 more minutes left. So if there are questions out there, I'm happy to give my answers.
I think there's a few that popped up here, Zev.
Okay.
You actually answered one, the COA. What does that mean? Which is Certificate of Analysis. But do you want to go a little deeper into what that means and why it's important?
I'm happy to, and there's a lot of different things that can be tested. What is typically tested for a lot of hemp products is getting a certificate of analysis on the mature flower, because that'll give you a pretty good idea of what a farmer can expect, or at least what has happened before. But it lists all the different kinds of cannabinoids and the percentages there, and more labs are including all sorts of things, all the different delta 8, delta 9 THC, sometimes delta V, certainly CBD, CBDA, CBC, CBG, CBN. I mean, some of them do like maybe 15 or maybe even 20 different cannabinoids. Then you can go beyond that. You can look for pesticides, you can look for heavy metals, you can look for microbials. You can, if it's extracted material, it'll have residual solvents. So there are a lot of things that can be tested for. But as I mentioned before, the kind of certificate of analysis you're looking for seeds really just only covers things like the germination, the feminization rate, and the purity. But if you can get some kind of a COA on the mature results of the seeds you're buying, that would give you additional information as well.
Thank you. And then another question that popped up, which is actually pretty important. I didn't even know how we didn't cover it earlier, but is there a window of time as to when testing needs to be done? which that's a big question in a short sentence.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And there's actually two different testings that we're talking about here. So one is what I'm suggesting is that you begin your testing process early, so that you know what the plant is doing. And that has nothing to do with state requirements. That's just you keeping track of it and knowing that if it starts to get close to the limit, that 0.3 total, that you very quickly contact the state, whoever's going to have to give you the final okay about the harvest. And that's part of it. The other is the timing window is most states will give you a very specific window of how early before harvest you need to test. And it depending on how busy they are, obviously the harvest is often happening at the same time. So some of these states get very busy. So you need to really give them enough. In some places, the USDA is now saying 15 days, but some people try to do it longer than that. The challenge is the time between you turning in a test and them giving you a response and you actually harvesting. The plant continues to evolve, continues to grow. So the numbers are going to be higher as it gets close, during that window. So it's a bit of a test to really get a sense of how quickly you can get an answer back, and you want to ask your state testing, what's the turnaround? How fast am I going to do it? Because as soon as you get that result, you're out in the field. You want to harvest it immediately. And obviously, if bad weather is coming, you're going to want to harvest it also so that it doesn't get affected that way. So, farmers are used to dealing with these kind of things to a certain degree, but it's still a bit of a dance.
Yeah, and a little different too, depending on where you are, as you pointed out, from state to state, that window. So let me see. The next question on here, Zev, is seed certification could be a barrier to growing in certain states, such as Florida. Does such certification mean seed cost will be higher, and then how much more?
Okay, good question. There's two things that we're talking about here. One is just verification. And that is really just going through the process that I talked about, where an individual goes out, hopefully an independent entity goes out and does the testing results so that you get what you think you're going to get. Certification is actually a much more formal process that is typically done at the state level. Could be done by university, but is often done by a state or an affiliate organization. And that often takes a period of time. Like here in Colorado, you would turn in a bunch of seeds. They would take them to a variety of locations because we have a lot of different climates here in Colorado, and they would plant them all in that. And at the end of the season, they would test them all. And if you come up with results that keep I don't know if it's 100%, but if it keeps the number of the level of THC below the requirement, then they would certify it. But that process actually has several different layers, where I think it's called breeder seed, foundation seed. Certified seed is often, a result of those other layers. So it's a real multi-year process. And that's what you get from Europe, because they've been doing it for a long time. We have very, very little certified seed here in the US. And is it more expensive? It can be. I mean, the seeds are already pretty expensive on the cannabinoid side. On the grain and fiber side, it's much less expensive, but you're dealing with much larger volumes. So ultimately, I think we're all going to move in that direction. That's just what happens with commodities, with food commodities and grains. So we will be doing that. So you might as well hop on the bandwagon early and get yourself connected with organizations and states and breeders who are already doing that.
Right, and this sounds like a loaded question here. Is growing hemp for seed a good business to get into? Sounds like a lot of paperwork, but you're sort of in the seed business, so you could help us unpack that a little better than me just saying.
Sure. Well, I mean, again, taking seeds through this process is a very typical thing in all, in all plants. So there are people out there are companies out there who are just seed breeders. That's what they do. They know what's involved. Yes, there's paperwork. Obviously, if it's organic certified, there's a whole bunch more paperwork. If you're serious about growing seed for sale, then you need to jump in with both feet and go through whatever the process is in your location to go through and get it validated. Now, the AOSCA certification, I think we're going to see more and more of that, because it's just another layer of reducing the risk for farmers and helping professionalize the industry. So it's definitely not just a lot of paperwork, but of course there is a lot of tracking, because you need to be able to trace all of the seeds that you're doing all the way back to when it was grown and where it was grown and when it was harvested and things like that. So it's just part of the process.
Do you think probably the last question we have time for, and it comes from me, but do you think as we get more into these certified seeds like at IOSCA or any of the other organizations that certify, and they become more commonplace in the US, do you think that's going to lead to less stringent testing protocols? Is that level of standardization and security going to help us as farmers on the back end when it's time to harvest our crops, or are we still going to have to go through the testing window and all of that?
I think it will absolutely make it less onerous once you've got something that is verified or certified, because the whole reason that we're having to go through testing is to make sure that these are not out of compliance. And I know that here in Colorado, if you had seed that got certified, and again, there are only a handful, but if you have seed that is certified, you do not need to go through the state testing process. So it is really why it's being done, but it's going to be a while before I think we really have a significant amount of that available for people. And again, year after year, if climate change continues to do what it does, and the climate in these growing locations continues to change, it may end up being a moving target for a while.
I think they just had a meeting overseas somewhere, Zev, to resolve all the climate issues. So that's
good. Yeah. I think they're yeah. When they come back and tell us, it should be all good. So I'm glad about that, and especially glad for my kids.
Yeah, no. Well, I've said this to everybody before, but we're really lucky to have Zev. Zev, you're someone that's been involved in this industry since the beginning, and we're really fortunate for you to share your knowledge and your time with us. And I can't thank you enough for everything that you've done today and prior to that to get this industry to where it is. So thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate you taking the time to educate us all.
Great. Thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure. Good to see you again. Glad to see you've landed in such a great organization. And I look forward to doing more. This has been a really informative webinar for me, and hopefully for the people who have been attending as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Zev. Appreciate your kind words. I do want to move into our next session, which is hemp crop insurance options. You've done well if you've stuck it out this far. For the next portion of the webinar, we are going to have discussing hemp crop insurance potential is NCAT's own Jeff Schahczenski. Jeff is an agricultural and natural resource economist with NCAT, which is, again, the National Center for Appropriate Technology. So you can find us easier on the internet. And his work focuses on education, on crop insurance, conservation, national agricultural policy, transgenics, specifically genetically modified organisms, blockchain agricultural supply chain management, soil health, biochar, and the role of agriculture in climate disruption. He was a past elected member of the Organizational Council on the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, past executive director of the Big Hole River Foundation and the Western Sustainable Agriculture Working Group, and the past adjunct instructor at Montana Technological University, Montana Western University, the University of Montana. And before moving to Montana in 1991, Jeff worked for Rutgers University, started one of the first CSAs, which is Community Supported Agriculture Farm in New Jersey, received graduate degrees in agricultural economics and political science, served in the Peace Corps in Belize, Central America, and worked many summers on his grandfather's dairy farm in Wisconsin, and now makes me feel like I have a lot more work to do in my life. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, I'm going to share a screen. Unlike our other professionals that can do it off the cuff, I still need my handicapped PowerPoints, but hopefully they'll be illuminating as well. And thank you for that kind introduction. And yeah, but I'm getting old, so, and I have had a wonderful and amazing life. So I'm happy with that. Why I ended up doing crop insurance is a whole nother story, but we'll get there. Okay, hopefully it's coming up. Everyone see it now?
You got it.
I got it. All right. That's good to know, because I'm always worried about that. Now I got to advance. Okay, crop insurance. There's always, with everything, there's jargon. Here's some quick things that I'll probably be using, and maybe others. So if I use acronyms, I know that's terrible, but there's always jargon with every field. Revenue risk is something that's actually not that, but it's just basically the idea that there is both yield and price risk. Yield risk is what most people think of, because that's usually what we call multiple peril. So the droughts, the floods, the things that affects what? The yield of your crop, and therefore its loss. But price can also be a risk, because when you plant something, or you grow a cow or whatever, on the other end, the price is different than when you start it. And that's a risk. And so revenue risk covers both, which is the other thing I'm talking about is the approved insurance provider. I'll use that AIP. I'll get into that a little bit later, but basically there's only 14 companies that sell federal crop insurance program in the United States. A lot of people know that. There's only 14. Liability is the value of what is insured. So, what it is valued at. Indemnity is either the payout for the insurable loss. And I'm going to start to sound like a crop insurance salesman at some point, and I don't want to. So bear with me, but crop insurance is only one way to mitigate risk. And actually, since most farmers in this country, at least in terms of just sheer number, do not have real good access to any crop insurance, they have learned how to use these other methods of mitigating risk, and they're very, very appropriate ones. But you can see pest, drought, fire, weather, some that you can control, some that you can't. Another way is to diversify. Replant. Hedging is a method of price revenue control for a lot of things. Build a bin, because then you can save your product as long as you can keep it in a bin and sell it when the price is better. So there's all kinds of ways to mitigate risk besides insurance. The federal crop insurance program, which I'm going to be concentrating on, which is where the only available hemp is available right now that I know of. There used to be a private one, but seems to have gone away. Anyway, is a weird public-private system. And as you can see from this diagram, the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation, which is operated by the RMA, the risk management agency, essentially oversees the federal programs. It's kind of its rules and regulations, and basically engages those 14 companies to service the products that are available. And there's a wide range of products. And the producers pay a portion of that premium to the insurance companies. That's how they make some money. And the other thing is what they call is a underwriting gain, which means in the good years, they make a little bit more money. And I'll show you exactly what they make more. As you see, the dark blue is the net payments to the AIPs, or those companies. So that's the money they got out of the program, and then that's what got paid to farmers. And does show you when there was when some hell broke loose in 2012. If any of you went around in that year, that was one of the worst nationwide droughts and calamities that we've experienced in the last few years. And a lot of payments went out but there were very little underwriting gains. In other words, there was way more payouts than pay-ins because it was a really bad year. So you do this over time, and sometimes you gain and sometimes you lose. So there's two ways to insure hemp. It's yield insurance, or what they call actual production history, APH. And it's a bit of a misnomer when we come into hemp, because the way this actually should work ultimately is that this history will based on your specific history for your growing of this crop. But at this point, there haven't been enough people growing this crop, so they have had to use substitute measures for that to be able to come up with your yield history. I'll get into that a little bit later. And because it's yield, it's only doing the multiple peril thing. It's not providing any revenue. This APH, they call it APH 90. And I'm never sure what the 90 means. Might have been 1990 that they switched, but anyway, they call it APH 90, or it might be the level of coverage you can possibly get. Whole farm revenue is another thing I've been working on for 18 years, but it's not exclusively for hemp, but it does include coverage for hemp. And it protects up to 80% of the revenue capacity of the whole farm. So to the extent hemp is one product of many in what you're growing, and in some ways that's maybe a good way to start. So you put all your eggs in one basket. Whole farm revenue could be a way to do it, particularly if hemp is a significant part of your revenue and you want to protect that revenue, which is nice about this, is it does include the risk of price as well as the risk of yield. There's going to be a micro version of this, and I'll talk about that a little bit later too, but it's brand new. We don't have much details on it, and I'll explain a little bit later. General eligibility for both these is that it has to be, you have to actually have a share, you have to have some ownership of the crop. You have to have at least 1 year of history producing the crop. But that's only true for the yield APH, actual production history policy. That's not necessarily true. I mean, it would be true in a way for whole farm, and I'll explain why, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be true for whole farm, that criteria. It's grown under a processor contract. This is a big deal. In other words, and it's only for that contracted part that you can insure. So if you have a contract, let's say for 50% of your production, but not for the other, the only insurable part is that 50%. The other will not be included in terms of your revenue guarantee or your yield guarantee for that crop, because it's only the contractual part. Why that is true, I don't know. I asked the question about whether that might be helpful if they could in fact open it up beyond contracted. It has grown under official, this has to do with all the stuff you guys have learned about today. The licensing, the state programs, federal programs, that has to be, you have to be doing it under some kind of permit, and it'll vary by state. It is planted for harvest as hemp in the requirements of the processor's contract. So the contract again plays in heavily here. And you essentially, if you violate your contract and whatever is in that contract, that could be a way to either lose your insurance or lose part of your indemnity should you make a claim. And indemnity, again, is your claim, your payout. It is planted to an adapted variety, not a variety prohibited by, and again, that's been discussed today. Causes of loss that are covered. Weather, of course, all those natural, earthquake. I say this because we're talking about West Coast, and that's a bigger possibility. The big one's coming. How likely it is, who knows, but it's covered. This failure of irrigation water is also important for the West. It's really failure of the irrigation if it's not due to your fault. And so that can be a judgment call. Fire, well, the West Coast knows about that one, and that's maybe an increasing risk. Insect and plant disease, except for insufficient or improper application of a pest or disease control measure. Now that, again, is a debatable issue. And when you get into a claim adjustment, that might become an issue. But basically, you've got to make an effort to grow this and not just let it go to hell and try to collect the insurance. Wildlife. And I live in Montana, and I hate deer because they eat every flower I ever try to grow. And there's volcanic eruption, which does occur mostly in Hawaii and sometimes other places in Washington. But there's also causes that are not. And of course, the big one, and this is a problem, is the whole THC hot hemp thing. And so it just simply, that is not an insurable cause of loss. Whether it should be or not would be an interesting federal policy issue to explore, because maybe if they don't change it, people need protection from that. Failure to follow requirements contained, we already discussed that. Any harvest production infected by mold use or that, so in other words, you got to take care of your product after you harvest it. Any damage or loss of production due to the inability of the market to reason that the actual fish you get for the hemp from an insurable cause of loss. That's kind of clear in itself. Changes in contracted price set as a base. So going in, you have to have this contracted price and a contract in general. And if it changes, the original price is what the guarantee will be set on. In the West Coast, these are the counties that hemp is insurable in. Why they're not insured in those other counties is always a strange question, and I do not know why. And it's also interesting that Washington doesn't, and that maybe that is that something to do perhaps with them not having a state or a federal way to grow it, but at this point, it's not available anywhere in Washington. So if we just look at the West Coast and why Inyo and why other counties in California are or are not, is something that if you really want to ask RMA, and I don't know if they can tell you. Whole farm, the other one I'll be talking about, is available everywhere. And that is the beauty of this product. It is not, in only certain states. So anybody, anywhere growing hemp, I guess under a legal contract, which might limit it, but or permit, but it is available. It's not an issue for as it is for APH. Oops, I went too fast. I'm gonna give you a quick thing here. It's gonna take a little. I'm gonna load, stop share, and I want to make sure that I'm loading the right screen here, and I will. There we go. Share. This is a very cool and new tool that just got updated. Still has some bugs in it. It's product of a climate hub, and it actually looks at crop insurance causes of loss, and it can give you a sense for constraint, at least insurable constraints that might be affecting you. And you'll see it's a very cool tool, and it's fun to play with. Won't spend a lot of time because we don't have a lot of time, but it has data down to the county level. I literally can, as you can see with my little pointer here, I can go down and look at a specific county data. And this includes all the crop insurance data from all the crop policies from 1989 to 2020. They just updated to 2020, which is very cool. It has some metrics, not all of which are totally clear. It's not the perfectly user-friendly tool, but for instance, I can look at the indemnities, that were paid out. I can look at the number of policies, the amount of subsidy. I am going to look at liability, and liability is the value of what was covered. I'm just going to update that. And then I'm going to also shift to state because I'm not going to go down to the county level. It just makes it a little easier to see some of this stuff. But since we're interested in hemp, unfortunately, hemp hasn't been available in insurance for a long time, so there's not much data in there. So I have to change this date to the most recent one that we can, because that's where hemp data is available. And then I have all commodities, and instead I can change that to just finding hemp, which is on this list down here. This is only available for 2020 because that's the data. The data somewhat lags in this tool, but it's pretty up to date. And this gives you, so this map is the liability payouts for industrial hemp for 2020 by state. And so if I wanted to say, oh, let's look at Montana. Montana covered in 2020 $189,000 worth of hemp. And guess what state did the most? $6 million of hemp was insured in the state of Colorado. And you notice the West Coast is vacant. And maybe that's why I'm doing this webinar, because maybe people will pursue insurance or maybe not. Again, I'm not into the selling. I could go into some details. If you press this, well, I guess I'll go there, and it'll give you some data. So if I wanted to look at, this is just Colorado's data. So again, in 2020, $6 million. It's interesting to see this cause of loss, since Colorado dominates. I've told people before this, hot wind, heat, and freezing are the major causes of loss in Colorado for hemp. And what will be cool as this data gets populated over time, we should be able to go to any county and any place and kind of see historically what were the causes of loss, which could help the farmer prepare for those potential losses, either through insurance or all the many other ways to mitigate risk. So I'm going to be done with this right now. And I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to go back to sharing where I left off with the presentation. So that's just a cool tool to use to start exploring risk. Okay, I'm hoping everything with the transition went well. So what does it cost? And of course, in insurance, believe me, I know for any other insurance, it always depends. Depends first of all on the coverage level. The higher the level of coverage, this is just think about think about car or think about health insurance. You want higher level coverage, costs more. But you can only go up to 75% with this APH yield policy. Whole farm can go up to 85, but we'll see that later. Depends on what type you're growing and method of propagation. And there are all these methods: grain, fiber, CBD whole plant, CBD whole plant direct seeded, CBD floral transplant, CBD floral direct seeded. So each one of these have varying ways to do it. So it depends. Coverage and how much value is covered depends on this method. And there's even the irrigation and the certified in that depends on certified organic. Organic has higher insurable value in some cases, but is usually assumed to have a yield that is lower, even though the data hasn't been really figured that out to prove that yet. They make that assumption, RMA and the people that develop this. And it depends on irrigation or not. Obviously, irrigation is less risk, depends on premium subsidy, which depends on coverage. And between 33 and 40% of the premium cost. So in other words, this is a subsidized product. So some of the cost is not paid by you, but paid by taxpayer dollars. This is kind of the mechanical way, and I'm going to actually show you. The producer selects the amount of coverage. The producer selects the percent of predicted price to insure between 55 and 100%. So in other words, you don't have to insure the entire value. You can take a lesser value, and I don't know why they do this exactly, but obviously the lower value of what you insure, the lower the premium. If the harvested price plus any appraised production is less than the yield insured, the producer's paid a payout indemnity based on the difference, and that difference is calculated by multiplying the difference from above by the insured percentage of the price is selected. So if it's 100%, it's 100% of the price when the crop was purchased by the insured share. So that's just a description of it. Now, I don't know how much time I'm going to maybe skip the browser. Well, I'll go there, and it'll take again a shifting, and I'm going to stop share there, share screen, and I'm going to go to this. Okay, here we are. So this is all on the RMA website, which I give you at the end, but you just go RMA, Google RMA, and it'll come up. And so this is what's called the actual browser. I know this terminology, but let's just look at the 2021 crop year, because really that's the kind of, hemp insurance is new. And I'm going to look for hemp, and there it is. So imagine that. And again, you can see it's the only, they don't actually tell you that whole farm is available, but on this case, they tell you that APH, the yield insurance, is available. And I'm going to pick California, and I'm going to pick my favorite county in California. One of my favorites, actually there's many, is Santa Barbara. And I'm going to view this report. You can do this. Anyone can do this. You can go on and use this actuarial browser. It's kind of a cool thing. Little bit of things that I get really used to using it. But here you can see all the practices. Remember, I was telling you, there's all these different ways to insure it. You have the, CBD transplant, CBD direct slide, you have grain, you have irrigated, you have irrigated non, you have certified, non-certified, and you even have transitional from certified, transitioning to organic. So a lot of different categories. Then I think the more interesting thing too is what's called a T yield. And a T yield, because hemp hasn't been grown that much, and this is why I'm a little bit critical of this policy in data, because there's really not much data on that. I mean, do you know what the historical yield of hemp was in Santa Barbara County over the last 5 years or the last 10 years, which is actually how T yield? T yield is transitional yield, and it's based on the actual data of those who have applied for insurance. You have to come up with an approved yield, and that approved yield is based on your actual production. And people who do commodities know how to do this quite well, and they have to keep track of that. And of course, you want your actual production history to be as high as possible, because that means, and it's going to, because that's going to be the basis of your coverage and the basis of your premium cost. So you want to get full value coverage. And this will tend to be, if you're taking this insurance, these are the numbers they are going to use. Now, you guys, some of the people are experts at growing, but look at some of these things. So if I'm doing non-irrigated grain in Santa Barbara, they're predicting that the county yield in Santa Barbara County is 421 pounds. I have no idea to know whether that's really true or not. We can move down here to some of the CBDs, because that seemed to be what people, let's go with CBD. This is the one I'm going to use. Actually, I'm going to use, let's go to the certified direct seeded floral right here. I'm showing you here. So we got the purpose for the growing is CBD. It's going to be direct seeded. It's going to be in an irrigated field, and it's going to be for flowers. And they're predicting the yield per acre is 844 pounds of flower. Flower means 6 inches and above the flower. You guys, I'm really curious if anybody thinks that's like crazy or outrageous, but that's what they predict. And that's not certified, I'm sorry. So, and I'm going to use a certified yield, which is actually less. It's over here somewhere if you look. The same equivalent, and this is where I get a little angry, because they say that, so that same direct seeded floral is only 707 pounds of it, again, asserting that certified organic yield of flowers is less than non-certified. Is that true or not? I don't know the basis of the data for that. And then there's something called special provisions, which we can maybe discuss, but it's always good. This is like the fine print of insurance, and you always should read about a little bit about the fine print. And this defines whole plant, and it applies floral. It has these weird, shall not means it won't be insured from which in the same calendar hay was grown, was harvested. I don't know why. And also of crop other than a crop that reached some mature. Basically, it's saying you can't have had another crop on that land within the same calendar year and be insurable. I'm not sure why they made that stipulation. And here's one that always also will not attach with cannabis. So if you were growing cannabis before, or dry, in other words, if you grow in these crops, it will not attach if they were grown in the preceding year. And maybe somebody can explain why that might have been an issue. So I'm going to get out of here, but that gives you some really good information about some basic things. And now I'm going to go back to the sharing screen again, and back to where I left off. And here we are again. So I'm going to run you through a really quick cost estimator. I was playing with it all this morning, and unfortunately it's the government and it's a nice tool, but if everybody's using the tool at the same time, which apparently, or something's gone wrong with USDA and the RMA, it is very slow sometimes to get an estimate, but you'll get a general gist of this, and you can play with this on your own. It's readily available on their website. It's a little bit tricky to use, but we're gonna go there. Again, I gotta stop sharing that screen. Screen share with this. And here we go. So this is the cost estimator. It estimates, gives you a general estimation of all crop insurance policies for all commodities entire United States. So it is a pretty complicated tool, but I'm going to do a personalized estimate. And I'm going to pick the 2021 year because the data for 2022 is not yet. We know that hemp is only an APH 90. It's also whole farm revenue. That's where I would go for that. And we're going to do that today. I'm going to select a state, and I'm going to again pick California, and I'm going to again pick Santa Barbara County. Boom, 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 boom. There it is, Santa Barbara, beautiful Santa Barbara. And continue. Although there are a lot of fires this year. And you can see By the way, these are the other products that you can insure for yield only in Santa Barbara County, but you see hemp is there. So I add that in. And I'm going to, and a lot of these things, commodity type, this is not relevant, that's not relevant. It is relevant for certain crops, it's relevant for, again, I'm going to go with a direct seeded floral. I'm going to go with irrigated, and because I'm a promoter of organic things, I'm going to use the organic certified hemp, even though we know the yield will be lower for that. And the price will actually be the same. I'll show you that. So here's that first thing you have to choose. And remember, it was $2 from the actual browser. You can get this number. And basically what this says is they're not going to pay more than $2.80 per pound of flour. And they're not going to, I should say it better. Your contractor even may pay more for it, but you can only insure it up to that amount. Even if your contractor, we're offering you more, you'll only be able to insure it to that maximum. There's something I can talk about later, but it gets more confusing. In some products, you can actually use the contracted value, but in the case of hemp, they haven't allowed that yet. And I'm just going to go with 5 acres because I did this before, and I know the browser might not. And the yield I'm going to use was, again, the T yield, because I have no idea what the real yield. And if it was you and you had some history, that would slowly become your actual history of yield, not the county's average yield. And in that case, they have estimated it to be, and there's a rate yield that means nothing for this case. And you do have to always put this in if you're the only person, if you were like splitting the farm and half of it was insured under, and the basic optional is really a little detail, but usually most people will use the basic. It's basically one farm, one crop. And now I'm ready to go if I hit all my buttons right, and I'll get an estimate. And here's where I may quit, because earlier this morning, it was taking 5 to 10 minutes to run it. And it shouldn't have to take that long, but it partly depends if USDA is mucking with it, RMA is mucking with it, or it's being overused. So since I'm seeing it's not coming up real fast, I will give you those numbers. I ran it, I did wait and get the numbers, so I'll show you what it actually costs, even though it'd be nice to see it on this tool, but it's going to take too long. So I'm going to go back to my share screen. Uh-oh, what's going on? Did I not stop share screen? Oh, there we are. Okay, I'm going to go back here. Just to give you the numbers on that deal I did with the 5 acres. According to RMA, the value of the floral product from that 5 acres was a total of, and that's the $2.80 a pound times the 5 acres times the yield of 707, amounts to about $9,898 in insurable value. And since you only can get up to 75%, the maximum insurance value for that is $7,420. And the cost for that premium for the producer side, not the subsidized full premium, was about $271. So for $271, you can protect up to 75% of your expected yield based on these criteria. Is it a good deal or not? You have to decide that. I have no idea. And maybe in the discussions, people can say, that's crazy, that's not even worth it. I have no idea. And there's a sales closing date, and they're coming up. And unfortunately, because California is so big, that date can vary to be the first of the year, 1/31 of this year. So the end of the January, end of February, or that. And I think generally speaking, the farther north you get, the later this over. But some have very specific dates on the West Coast. And again, Washington isn't available. And again, I'm going to switch to whole farm. So that completes the yield insurance. And I'm going to do whole farm revenue again, everywhere. There's a little bit some other things. You have to have at least 3 years of operation with tax records. In other words, you file taxes for those 3 years, and for a beginning farmer only, and 5 years otherwise. So this is not So again, this is not insuring hemp per se, but only if hemp is part of your production. So you don't have to have been growing hemp for 5 years, but you have to be a grower for at least 5 years or 3 years if you're a veteran and beginning farmer. And they usually skip the year and go back 6 years because usually people, by the time they want to buy it, haven't filed their tax form for that current year. Just a stupid little bit of a lag. Covers most any product, and I'll show you that. I mean, it really does. There's, except like show dogs and some bizarre things, you can insure almost anything, and hemp is included, of course. And the indemnity payment won't be made until your taxes are filed. So if I was insured in 2022, I wouldn't really be able to I can make the claim, but the process could not be finished until I filed those 2022 tax forms, because everything is based off of tax forms, which is a disadvantage, but somehow we have to calculate the capacity of the revenue of the farm to make it work. Predicts price and yield, as I said, covers, improves with 3 or more products. So in other words, if you have you have more products, you can get a higher level of coverage, but you have to have at least 3 things you're growing. And the premium will lower. It has a diversity discount. So the more diverse you are, the lower the cost, up to 7. Why 7? I have no idea. Asked a million times. They just think it isn't worth the added, decrease in diversity beyond 7. But you get a lower. But it makes sense. If you have growing more things, then any one thing could compensate for the other. Therefore, your whole farm revenue is less at risk the more diverse you are, which is a good thing for sustainability. Covers almost any crop and livestock product. Up to that limit. It's based on your historic revenue. And again, it would automatically, if you've been growing organically, then your revenue would be reflected in that. And I said there's a micro program coming out, and the details, we have no idea about that yet. Ideally, it incentivizes diversity. It has actually been called out as one of the best products for climate in the future because it incentivizes diversity of crop and livestock systems. It's the only insurance policy that does this, and actually was called out for doing that great job. But the reality is that only 1,900 policies of this were sold in 2021, and I can't spend all the time talking to you why that is true. I've worked on this. Most of my 18 years of my professional career, I've tried very hard to improve this access and making this work for people, but I have struck many barrier to that reality being known. So I'm not. It works for people. It can work for people, and you should explore it. But I can't say that it will work for you. Partly depends on the variability of your revenue. Because if you're going to base it on your historic revenue, if you have a highly variable one, then your average is going to come out less. And so therefore a less variable one would mean that your whole farm's revenue capacity is very close to the year in which you're going to insure. Depends on how different you expect revenue and insurance years is compared to your history. So in other words, if you suddenly think you're going to produce more and you want it in the insurance year, but your history says, nah, you can't make that, then you're going to be stuck with the lower of the two, or the lower historical one, and then you might not like that. It might not really give you what you want. But again, you have to explore it to find out. And it depends again, how many products, less is more. So depends on the expected value of your hemp production compared to the revenue expected for all your other products. So if hemp is just a tiny part of your whole farm's revenue, then you might not even be able to insure it because it has to be a significant part of your revenue to even count. And then if it's a small part of your revenue, you may see other things collapse or gain that will, even if your whole hemp wipes out, it will be augmented by the revenue generated by the other crops. So here's a quick and dirty original historic yield. So they actually have this very convoluted way. You have to estimate all these. So this is the original revenue history of the farm, and you can see it's quite variable. So its average is 130. If they allow you to do this to replace the 60% average, which is 78,000, you can replace it with those two, you get a higher revenue. If you can also throw out the lowest year, you get a revenue. And you can also base it on 90% of whatever you insured last year. In this case, 130,000. So you have many, and so in this case, you would probably be choosing the $157,000 because again, that would give you the highest value upon which to do. I just made this up. These are actually real numbers, pretty much fairly current. And I added organic hemp files and 11 acres of it, which again, valued at their estimation, gave this farm an expected revenue of 153 for that year. So we have 157 historic revenue, approved revenue, and we have 153 expected. The revenue guarantee, I guess, is on the lower. So the revenue in this case is going to be based on your current year because it's actually lower than your history, which is not too often, but sometimes happens. Revenue guarantee then is $153.63. The trigger point is 85%. So in other words, until you have either a revenue or a yield loss that drives what happens in the insurance year below $130,592, you don't see a dime from this policy. So the loss required is a $23 in value from the whole farm before you see any subsidy, whether that was generated by the hemp or the other crops that you were growing. So the premium total for that is that the producer would pay $7,000 for that premium. Now, again, that was a lot, that's a lot higher than it was for the, you remember, for the APH, but again, you're covering the whole farm's revenue, not just the hemp in this case. Reporting revenue requirements and paperwork can be very onerous, and it's really unnecessarily onerous in my opinion. Company has the power to ask via their agents to ask for even more paperwork if they have reasons. For instance, your Schedule F and tax forms ought to be sufficient to determine your historical revenue, but they can ask for more records. And this is where things get mucked up a lot with this policy, because they often do. But therefore, if they ask for more records and you really want to explore this policy and you're actually going to fill it out, you should ask them as to why they need more records, because it's only at their discretion, the agent and the insurance company's discretion, to ask for it. And you should be at least told why they need more. And again, the micro program, which is coming, which might be less. So conclusions, if you're only growing hemp, the APH program is only an option if it's available in your county. And it's not much of a, they have this thing called written agreements where sometimes they will base it on a nearby county and they will give you a special policy, but it's a very hard process to go through and might be problematic with hemp. But it is a thing you could explore with your agent about setting up a written agreement. I have no knowledge of anybody ever doing it for this crop. If you are growing hemp as one product with other products, and hemp is a significant risk of loss and part of your revenue, it may be an option, but you have to run the numbers to find out. And the advantage is that it's available everywhere, and it also includes the revenue risk, not just yield. And whole farm badly needs reform. I've been working on this for many years to get that reform, and it's too very burdensome, but you know, and all of them all federal crop insurance agents have to sell this policy, whole farm revenue, but many of them don't like selling it because they think it's too cumbersome. You can't make as much money, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of reasons they give, but they legally must. But again, who wants to buy insurance policy from an agent who doesn't really want to sell it to you and doesn't really want to help you? So you have to search out agents if you really want to look at this and really want to use it. However, you have 7 or less products, there's some premium advantage again, and an application process a little bit burdensome, the less crops you have to account for. And there's the RMA website where you can get this tools, is where you can get the crop estimator, the actual you can look at a lot of different things. It's a pretty great website for exploring all crop insurance options. And I'm going to quit with my lovely lambs. And there's some links that you can get to later and will be on here forever. And there's my contact information. So I am done, and I guess I'll stop sharing or leave that up and take any questions. How did I do?
You did great.
I know that's a lot of information and packed into a short amount of time.
Well, I'm assuming you did really great, Jeff, because we didn't, not a lot of questions popped up, and I actually let you go on for 10 minutes longer during the question and
Okay, I should have
phase.
timed it better, but that's pretty good.
Well, no, I think it was great. I mean, I'll hold on for just a second. I mean, we're moving into closing, but
Yeah, I know.
if anybody has any specific questions for Jeff, now is the time to raise your hand or throw it in the chat. But his email's right there as well. So that being said, and not seeing anything come up, Jeff, I'm going to stop your share and return to mine. Maybe.
Yeah.
Let's see. Got
And
two.
Mike, could I maybe motivate? I am curious. I mean, if there's any growers out there or anybody, obviously the industry knowledgeable people, did those yield and price things from Santa Barbara make any sense at all to anyone?
Yeah, I think. I'm sorry, was somebody else jumping?
Go ahead.
No, I think they were a little low, but I think they were, they were on. If I had a bad year, I would expect 700 or 800 pounds per acre.
Flower.
They were,
Okay.
yeah, I think they were.
Yeah.
They were conservative but good.
Okay. Yeah, I never know because one of the things that's really complicated about this is that there's a lot of data on the history of growing and the prices for these things. So, and what about the price? I mean, the price for flour, $2.08 a 28, is that low, high, good?
Compared to 2 years ago, it's really low, but I think, it's about where we're settling as an industry.
Yeah.
It seems like. I mean,
I looked at last year's what they call the price election, and it was higher last year. So it was like 3 for that same county. It was like 3. So they recognized the market change to some extent. I just don't have an idea if those are realistic numbers, because obviously those numbers matter if you don't really get the value for your insurance because they're just crazy numbers that don't make sense to people. Then it's not going to work for people.
Yeah, I think they're there. I think, if you look back 3 or 4 years ago, your jaw would hit the floor if you look. I think in 2016, I was closer to $110 a pound.
Oh, so that's why you're rich now, huh? Right?
Yeah, that's why I'm still working with you, bud. No, I have those contracts that didn't work out. So,
all right, go ahead.
But thank you so much, Jeff. Your expertise makes me think that we need to get you out there to more people in this space. So hopefully with this recording being sent out, it will. I do again want to take a minute to thank everybody that was with us today. Zev Paiss, Courtney Moran, Goggin, Blake Butler, Jody McGinness, Jeff, my co-worker and collaborator in this project, Catherine. This has been a wonderful series. So if we did not get to a question for you, or if something comes up after this, I did put up the link here, and this will be sent out to everybody after. So you can reach us at our ATTRA hotline or through our website. So if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for. And that's what we all like to do, obviously. Again, I'm going to ask my coworker, Catherine, to drop the survey back at the bottom of the chat again. Again, this survey is important to us in terms of helping figure out how to better serve you all moving forward. Again, we said earlier, this is the last webinar in this series, but rest assured, NCAT and all of our national specialists are going to be working on more of these, and that survey will help us figure out how to better serve you as farmers. I also want to add that these, there's Catherine and my email. And I want to just touch on that these webinars, this was the 4th and the final, and they all are available on the NCAT and ATTRA's YouTube channel and our website. And some of them are up now. The rest of them will be coming up as they get edited to take out all of my technological flubs throughout this presentation. But we'll be sending out an email to everybody that registered for this event, letting you know when those are live so you can access this information again. That is really all we have for you today. Oh, forgive me. These are the webinars. I do want to cover that real quick. The first webinar was navigating opportunities and risks. That is available now, I believe, on the YouTube and website. The second webinar was cultivation and production. The third webinar was harvesting, processing, and marketing. And then, of course, this one will be up there, regulation, compliance, and insurance. I'm sure, Jeff, you're going to be getting a lot of emails because you gave us a lot of information. And again, that's all I have. I think we're actually on time, which I don't get a bonus for that, but I feel pretty good about it. So thanks, everybody. Any questions, reach out to us, and y'all are wonderful for taking your time out to join us. And just a shout out to my coworker, Catherine, for a wonderful job putting this together and making my life easy on this webinar series. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, everybody. This was great. Take care.